Did science fiction ever predict the internet? Surely must have, right? Well, depending on what circles of the internet you frequent, you might have come across claims that science fiction never predicted the internet. I've heard this quite a lot. I don't know if it's a common belief or I just hang out with the wrong type of crowd, but I've heard this a lot. The fact that science fiction predicted ray guns and flying cars and a teleportation and everything under the sun, but it somehow missed one of the most essential and most important technological developments of our lives. Surely that can be the case, right? Searching the web, you come across sites like this one, this post on the Print2Sf subreddit, which is a very good subreddit to follow, by the way, on the subject and with the title, Why Science Fiction Writers Could Never Imagine the Internet, and it references to a Slate article written by Lawrence Krauss about the same topic. A small digression, why is anybody listening to Lawrence Krauss on this subject? Why is Krauss even writing about this? Why is Slate asking Krauss? I know the article is from 2017, but who cares what Krauss has to say, right? I mean, he's not an authority on this. He's not an expert on this. Has he checked all science fiction to say that? I don't know, and I don't know that he is the guy to make that determination. It's kind of, I don't know, it kind of felt weird to me that Lawrence Krauss, of all people, writes about this topic. He's also a featured interviewer in the documentary Lo and Behold, Reveries of a Connected World, I believe it's called, by Werner Herzog, well-known filmmaker and documentarian. An interesting documentary, not one of his best, I would say. And Lawrence Krauss is in that one too, and he's making a similar claim, which I don't really get. I mean, if they wanted the science fictional perspective, they could have just gotten someone from science fiction, either a writer or a scholar, right? Like, why did they have to interview Lawrence Krauss about this? I just don't get it. But anyway, the claim is that science fiction imagined many things, but the internet just wasn't really one of them. And isn't that an interesting phenomena? Well, is it true in the first place? And that's kind of what this video is about. Well, it's not true, obviously. I wouldn't have made the video if it was true, but let's see if we can get there and try to understand what it is that we mean by predicting the internet and what work of science fiction did that, and we'll get to that in a bit. As an aside, I know that the point of science fiction isn't really to predict things, it's to tell stories like all of literature. Science fiction is not really about the future, it's about the present. Like, again, all literature, regardless of genre, the predictions don't really matter except for what they say about the present, or in a few cases to warn us about where things might be heading according to whatever author is writing or is making the predictions. Still, it is a fun little exercise to think about, and it is fun to look in the past and see what kind of imagination, what the writer's imagination had to say about the world and when they were right and they were wrong. It's a little bit of fun, and it's also my channel. I can do whatever I want, so don't worry too much about it. Anyway, to answer this question, we should probably say a couple of things about what exactly it is that we're looking for and what constitutes an appropriate answer to this question in the first place, right? The way I see it, there are a couple of things that we have to consider when examining how science fiction predicted a technology like the internet. The when and the what. When was the prediction made, and what is it exactly that it predicts? For the when part, obviously, the later the prediction is made, the less impressive it is. That kind of makes sense, right? If it's the later it is, the less of a prediction it is, to the point that it might not even be a prediction at all. It is just a description of what has currently happened with maybe a little bit of extrapolation. To give an example, we have ARPANET, which is a precursor to the modern internet. In many ways, it sort of developed a lot of technologies and concepts that were later used by the internet as we know it today, and it shares so many of the characteristics. And that was developed in the late 60s and was continued, became more widely used in the 70s and possibly the 80s. I'm not sure. Surely anything that sort of like any science fiction written post ARPANET, so let's say in the 70s, it must be less impressive than something that makes similar predictions but was written, before the 70s. To give an example in fiction, we have the concept of cyberspace in William Gibson's Neuromancer, which is often considered a pretty clear analog of the internet. But again, these technologies sort of already existed when Gibson was writing this story. We have the aforementioned ARPANET, and then we probably had systems like bulletin board system, BBSs, chat rooms, all kinds of computer networks, and things like that. They all exist. And so Gibson was not really inventing it out of thin air, was extrapolating an existing technology that was already pretty advanced at the point that he was writing. And sure, you can argue that all prediction in science fiction is extrapolation, but I think there is a distinction that maybe is not easy to articulate, but we can all recognize it when we see it. We are looking for something more than something that just a slight modification of something that exists. We're looking at something that requires like a bigger leap, right? Like I said, it's not easy to articulate, but I think it is. We know what we're talking about. Or maybe I'm just too picky. I don't know, but I am making the list. So whatever that may be. But I think there is definitely something more that I think we kind of have to look for when we're trying to find something that predicts a technology, especially a technology like the internet, more than someone just taking something that is already existing and modifying it a little bit, like I said. So in giving an answer to the question, did science fiction predict the internet, time matters. I'm hesitant to give a precise cutoff. Maybe the 70s is a good approximation. Something around there, mid 70s, maybe anything that was written after that is probably too late to count as having predicted the internet. The second point that we have to address is the what. What is the internet? Or more specifically, what must be present in a work of science fiction so I can say this work predicted the internet? I don't think it's an easy question to answer. In his essay, Defining Science Fiction, literary and science fiction scholar Eric S. Rapkin suggests that there are 4 ways to construct a definition. We have a characteristic definition, which simply lists the literal characteristic of a thing you're trying to define. You have a prototypical definition, which is sort of defining by example. You have the operational definition, which is the thing you're trying to find is the result of some kind of operation. And then we have a social definition, which is the thing is whatever we say, whatever society in large says it is. I'm going to take these types of definition and adapt them a little bit for the purposes of describing what constitutes a prediction in a science fictional story, a linear combination, if you will. There are just the way I see it, there are 2 ways to look at things. One, we can have a technical or more generally a materialistic definition, which describes the thing as it exists in the world, not necessarily physical, but sort of describes the component, what makes it up, right? And so in the case of the internet, it will be literally clients as servers, things like HTTP, TCP/IP, networks, algorithms, hard drives, I don't know, SSDs, whatever, all the technical components that make up the internet. And then a second way to look at it is through a more functional or component-based I'd say more functional definition, which is what the thing does and how it uses. And this can be multifaceted. It doesn't have to be sort of like a single one. It can be a list of things, but it is functional in nature. It is what functions it serves in society and how we use it. And while science fiction makes materialistic predictions all the time, I think in this case it might be unfair to expect any work of science fiction to give us a materialistic definition of a prediction of what the internet is. I think it would be more fair to expect a functional definition of the internet to appear in a work of science fiction. Again, William Gibson's Neuromancer is a great example with the concept of cyberspace. Here, while cyberspace in Neuromancer is nothing like, at least superficially speaking, is nothing like the modern internet, it's a lot more elaborate, it's a lot more physical. People have to jack in, as he calls it, that involves your brain. Your nervous system is kind of a virtual reality environment. It's still, in a functional sense, it meets the definition of the internet, right? It meets the functional definition of the internet. It's a vast network of interconnected data and servers, albeit a bit vague for the purposes of whatever story William Gibson was trying to tell in that book. I think you have something similar in the Tron movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but is the Tron universe kind of similar to the cyberspace? I think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I remember. But maybe Tron is also another example. Let's just say it is. Anyway, so we're operating under a functional definition. We don't care what it looks like. as long as it quacks like a duck, it is a duck, and that's really all we care about. Then what is a functional definition of the internet? That's also hard to do because the internet is not a monolith. It serves a multitude function, and I don't know that I want to try to list every possible thing that the internet does that we use for in this video, mostly because I'm a little bit too lazy to do that. But also, I don't want to paint myself into any corners. It's something that we kind of understand intuitively what it is. We sort of have to operate on vibes a little bit here. It's something that I think when something serves the purpose that we use the internet, we kind of recognize it. But to give a few examples, a non-exhaustive list of functions of the internet: direct communication, calls, video calls, text messages, IMs, all that. There's a networking component, so the interconnected computers component of the internet. The internet serves as a tool of computational power. It serves as a repository of information. There's a social aspect to it, a social networking aspect as well. Another way to look at it would be its ubiquity, how it has become essential or important in pretty much every aspect of life, and it's everywhere. And it's, maybe more specific, how it is used in business, in the economy, in schools, in science, and everywhere else. So these are a few ways that we can sort of expect to see in a work of science fiction of how the internet may be defined, or what a technology that is similar to the internet. These are some of the functions that it may serve. Here's another trap, though. Because there are so many aspects to the internet, how much of it must science fiction have predicted for us to say this work of science fiction predicted the internet? Does a work of science fiction have to list every single thing that the internet is known for? Well, obviously that is a bit unrealistic. Is it sufficient that it just gets one right? Maybe, but that also doesn't really feel right. The internet has taken over roles that other inventions, other technologies used to do. And if, let's say, the telephone or television, if a work of science fiction predicts those things, or has technologies that describe the functions of those other technologies like the telephone and the television, it wouldn't be right to say that they predicted the internet, right? They predicted television, but I think that's separate from the internet, right? So some examples of this include Mark Twain's From the London Times of 1904, which describes a device used for video calls, video communications. And you also have something very similar in The Machine Stops by Ian Forster's. And while both describe, this device that enables instant video and text communication, presumably, if I remember it correctly, those are technologies that have existed long before the internet, both as concept and also as actual technologies. If the Wikipedia article on video communication is to be believed, AT&T had a version of it as early as 1930. So even though these works describe those specific technologies, I don't think it would be correct to say that they predicted the internet. At least not entirely. I don't know. Somehow these vague criteria that I've established don't seem to be satisfied. Whether or not you agree with that or not, there's a bit of subjectivity to that. There's no way around it, I guess. So given all this, or at least I, am looking for something more. And to get to the meat of the video, the only story that I'm aware of that provides us that something more, that satisfies all these criteria that I've kind of established here, is the story A Logic Named Joe by Murray Leinster, published in 1946 in Astounding Science Fiction magazine. So what is this story about? Well, it kind of is about the internet, or a version of it. It's told in first person by someone who we only know as Ducky. That is a nickname given to him by his ex-girlfriend. I don't think we ever get his real name. He's just simply referred to as Ducky, or he's the narrator, so he's not really referred to that often. But anyway, Ducky is a maintenance man for the Logic Company, and the main product of the Logics Company are these devices called Logics. What is a logic, you may ask? Well, logic is pretty much the computer in this world. It's a term for computers in this world, but it's not just a computer. It's a computer that is connected to a central repository. In the story, they're called tanks that contain all available public information that can be accessed by anyone who owns a logic device. And not only that, but each of these central tanks are connected to every other tank in every other city all over the country. So the information that people can access is virtually limitless. Let's read Leinster's description of the logic. You got a logic in your house. It looks like a vision receiver used to, only it's got keys instead of dials, and you punch the keys for what you want to get. It's hooked into the tang, which has the Carson circuit all fixed up with relays. Say you punch station snafu on your logic. Relays in the tank take over, and whatever vision program snafu is telecasting comes into your logic screen. Or you punch Sally Hancock's phone, and the screen blinks and sputters, and you hooked up with a logic in her house, and if somebody answers, you got a vision phone connection. But besides that, if you punch for the weather forecast, or who wants today raise in Hialeah, or who was the mistress at the White House during the Garfield administration, or what is PDQ&R selling for today, that comes on your screen too. The relays and the tanks do it. The tank is a big building full of all the facts in creation and all the recorded telecasts that were ever made. And it's hooked in with all the other tanks all over the country. And everything you want to know or see or hear, you punch for it and you get it. Very convenient. Also, it does math for you and keeps the books and acts as a consulting chemist, physicist, astronomer, and tea leaf reader with advice to the lovelorn thrown in. The only thing it won't tell you is exactly what your wife meant when she said, "Oh, you think so, do you?" in that peculiar kind of voice. Logics don't work good on women, only things that make sense. You can already see the huge overlap between the logics in the story and the internet. These logics can be used for communication, obtaining information, for computation, to stream movies, TV, music presumably, for school, for work, for science, and pretty much everything other than telling why your wife is mad at you. Probably because you keep calling her nonsensical, but that is besides the point. And these logics are everywhere. It's there. The people have them in their houses, their work. There are public ones. Maybe they're even portable ones. I don't remember exactly, but they are ubiquitous and they are everywhere. So what happens next? Well, while everything is great, things start to fall apart. Things start to go a bit haywire when one of these logics, recently purchased by some random family in the story, begins to malfunctions. This logic can tell you everything, but won't necessarily do so. It's sort of like a security feature or a form of regulation. Like, it won't give you someone's address, even though it might have that information. It is sort of designed to respect people's privacy. There are also content filters, like, for example, it won't show kids, it won't give kids access to pornography or things that they shouldn't really have access to. It won't tell you how to make a bomb or how to overthrow the government, things of that nature. This does change when one of the logics, which the protagonist nicknames Joe, makes it possible to bypass these security features. It's sort of a malfunction or a bug. The Wikipedia article for this story described this as the Joe gaining sapience, and maybe that's the case, although I'm not 100% sure. While the narrator certainly anthropomorphizes Joe, he says that Joe is just trying to do what the logics were designed to do, provide information and help people. He's just trying to do it in a far more ambitious way than other logic, through a flaw in manufacturing, and is just trying to maximize this functionality, removing all restrictions in the way. As Ducky puts it in the story, Joe ain't vicious, you understand. He ain't like one of those ambitious robots you read that make up their minds the human race is inefficient and has got to be wiped out and replaced by thinking machine. Joe's just got ambition. If you were a machine, you'd want to work right, wouldn't you? That's Joe. He wants to work right, and he's a logic. So as he's left on by the family that owns him, Joe connects to the central tank, to the central repository, and start processing all the information that is available there, not only removing all restrictions so he can maximize his ability to help everyone, but he's also making new discovery, generating new information based on the data that's already there. It's essentially becoming an AI, the perfect AI, or to use a more relevant term nowadays, an AGI, as it's described in the story. You see, the data was in the tank. The logic, since Joe has closed some relays here and there in the tank, simply integrates the facts. That's all. Not only is Joe telling everyone pretty much anything without restriction, but he's able to figure out things that humanity has not figured out yet. People ask him how to commit the perfect murder, how to build the perfect counterfeiting machines. Kids ask him about pornography and sex, things that normally they wouldn't get. And Joe is essentially revealing that information without any restrictions whatsoever. And what's more relevant to our main character, Ducky, Joe is telling his unstable ex-girlfriend how to find him, something that his current wife certainly will not appreciate. And this is obviously becoming an existential threat as people are obtaining information about things that they really shouldn't have or that should be restricted. And although it's kind of described in a relatively comical way. And while Ducky in the story, and most of the story, is primarily motivated by his wife not finding out about his ex-girlfriend, the larger threat is abundantly obvious in the story. So how does this all conclude? Well, we've already established that Joe is not some evil AI. He's just doing what he was designed to do, but on steroids and ignoring all the roadblocks. So Ducky is able to figure out that he can just ask Joe, he can just ask the logic what the problem is, what caused the problem, and how to solve it. And because Joe knows everything, or he can figure out everything, he tells him, and even tells him in what family owns him. So the narrator simply goes to that house and inconspicuously replaces Joe with a regular logic, and the whole ordeal is over. Ducky has saved the world, even though nobody will ever know it. He hides Joe in his basement and occasionally wonders if he should ever use him. Just one time, just maybe to get rich, make a quick $1 million, or to maybe discover a potion that cures old age or something like that. And he's hesitant. He says, "Oh no, that wouldn't be a good idea. That would be a terrible idea. But what if he just did it one time, maybe really quick? What if?" And the story ends with that little bit of temptation, ending just like it started. Murray Leinster, the writer of the story, is a pen name for William Fitzgerald Jenkins, and he is one of the big names in this era of science fiction. He doesn't have the reputation of someone like Asimov or Heinlein or Clarke or even Simak, especially for a casual reader, someone who's not deeply entrenched into the science fictional community. But he's still a pretty solid figure of what is known as the golden age of science fiction. He actually started earlier. He started in the pulp era and was one of the few writers that successfully transitioned from the pulps into the golden age. I suspect that writing for the pulps was a big reason he used a pen name, as the pulps were not very highly regarded. He probably wanted to distinguish his professional life from his writing life, although he would use his real name in later work. In fact, a Logic named Joe was published under his real name, although because Murray Leinster as a name is more recognizable, a lot of his rework has been republished only under that name as Murray Leinster. In his professional life, Leinster was an inventor and engineer, and during the Second World War, he worked for the Office of War Information, and he was probably immersed in media and communication when writing this story, 1945-1946, and the first electronic computer had just come out, ENIAC, and there had been previous versions of computers as well. The effort to develop a digital computer had been going on for the entirety of the Second World War, and someone like Leinster would probably have followed those efforts closely. So you can sort of see how all these factors together may have led Leinster into writing this story. Even so, the overlap between the logics in the story and the modern internet is completely uncanny. The logics in the story check so many of the boxes that make them so nearly identical to the modern internet. To give a few examples, just both are used for communication, all kinds of communication. They use for entertainment. Logic can stream movies and TV and presumably other things. They provide computational power. There's a networking structure that is already there. It's used as a repository of information. Every known fact can be accessed through the logics. There is a social networking component to the logics as well. They're ubiquitous. That's a big point in the story. They dominate every aspect of life. There's one part where the character suggests, when the crisis is going on, where the character suggests shutting the logics down for a little bit. One engineer says to him, Does it occur to you, fella, that the tanks have been doing all the computing for every business office for years? It's been handling the distribution of 94% of all telecast programs, has given out all information on weather, plane schedules, special sales, employment opportunities, and news, has handled all person-to-person contacts over wires and recorded every business conversation and agreement. Listen, fella, logics change civilization. Logics are civilization. The crazy part of this is that if someone suggested today that we shut off the internet, you can simply read this paragraph to them, and almost every point will be entirely valid. The internet is an essential technology. The internet is pretty much modern civilization, and that's so astonishing. That's such an amazing thing to have been written almost 80 years ago today. Another element of the story is this connection between the logics and AI, specifically how the information in the tanks that the logics are connected to enable Joe to become the powerful AI that he becomes. Just like in the real world, while AI is not specifically connected to the internet, the modern AI revolution has been in large part enabled by the huge amount of data that only exists due to the internet. So the connection is definitely there, and it's even more amazing that it depicts AI as just simply this integration of data, which is what AI is really in the real world, rather than this kind of vague intelligence that is how it is often depicted in science fiction. So Murray Leinster essentially hits the nail on the head in so many ways. To answer the original question, did science fiction ever predict the internet? The answer is a definitive yes, it did. A logic named Joe, written by Murray Leinster, predicted the internet, and I don't see, other than actually inventing it, I don't see how he could have done a much better job. The whole thing is just astonishing. To give a few closing thoughts on the story, A Logic Named Joe is not a very popular story in the mainstream, and even in the more dedicated science fiction circles, it's sort of mainly known as that story that predicted the internet, which is true, but it's also a little bit of a shame in my opinion, because I think it's actually a pretty good story. Aside from that, it's funny. I think it has a unique style and it has a unique voice. It feels pretty modern, other than a couple of anachronisms here and there, which is inevitable for a story written in the 40s. It's pretty lean, it's fast-paced, and it's entertaining, and it's also pretty interesting thematically. While I focused on the technological aspects because that's what this video is about, the story is really about people. It's about how we would respond to this kind of technology and this kind of crisis, about how we would take this abundance of information and essentially technology that can do everything, and use it for pretty selfish reason. And depending on who you ask, that's what the internet has pretty much become. And who knows, maybe one day it will end up in someone's basement, just like Joe. But I think we're pretty far away from that scenario. And really, that's all I wanted to say about this topic. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you have any other stories that you think are impressive in this regard, that make interesting predictions about the internet or other technologies, feel free to recommend them in the comments. If you don't agree with my assessment of how I approach the subject, of how I kind of defined what is and what isn't a prediction, also feel free to leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, I hope I will see you next time.